Want to live out a vampire power fantasy and conquer the land of the living? Then V Rising might just be the game for you. Released into early access back in 2022, V Rising is a vampire survival ARPG with PVE and PVP content. The game is seeing its full release this week on May 8th, and in this video, I'm going to go over some beginner tips and tricks I wish I knew before playing the game. So stay tuned to learn all you'll need to know to carry you through the early game and make your journey to becoming a vampire lord enjoyable and smooth. Big shout out to the developers Stunlock Studios for sponsoring this video and giving me early access to the full release build. Without further ado, let's buckle up, grab some iced coffee, and dive into the video. So let's talk about some of the things you'll be doing in the first few hours of V Rising. After completing the tutorial graveyard and a few objectives, you will be prompted to start building your castle. One massive mistake that I made while playing this game is placing my castle near the edge of the map close to the starter zone. And yeah, I really regret this. Fast travel is very limited in this game, so ideally you want to put your castle somewhere near the center of the map to minimize backtracking and make it easier to go farming, because you'll be doing a lot of farming runs in this game to gather important building and upgrade materials. Now, if you do build your castle in a less than ideal place, it's not the end of the world. You can move it later on by crafting a castle relocation heart in a new location. But to be honest, this is kind of a pain in the ass. You have to build the castle relocation heart, and then build a bunch of other structures, and then start over, and I just didn't even want to bother with this, so I just abandoned it. So putting your castle in a better location to begin with will save you a lot of hassle. So what are some good criteria for placing your castle? Ideally, you would want to place it in an open, elevated space to make it easier to defend, particularly on PvP servers. On PvE servers, this isn't as important though. But basically, you want to have enough space to be able to expand and grow your castle as you progress throughout the game. So if you cram it into a small location next to someone else's castle or a bandit camp, that will limit how much you can build. So basically do the exact opposite of what I did when starting this game. It's also worth pointing out that better castle locations are likely going to have a lot of competition depending on how many people are on your server. I scouted the center of the map to look for a new castle location, and pretty much every single spot was already taken. Traveling around the map can be treacherous and time-consuming, so it's important to understand how to get around faster. Vampire waygates allow you to fast travel, which is a great way to quickly return to your castle when out in the world. However, many crafting items and resources cannot be carried through these waygates. So if you're going on a farming run, expect to make the return trip on foot. If you want to pick up the pace a little bit, you can grab a horse. Many of these can be found in the central region called Dunley Farmlands. Simply mount up by holding F, and you can increase your speed to a gallop by hitting the E key. V Rising also has a day-night cycle, and sunlight is very harmful to your character. If you spend more than a few seconds out in the open, you'll start taking massive damage as the sun cooks you alive. It is possible to travel during the daylight, but you'll want to stay glued to tree lines and other sources of shade to avoid taking damage. I generally try to avoid combat during the daylight too, because it's much harder to maneuver against enemies if the sun is trying to kill you as well. Combat obviously plays a major role in V Rising, so let's talk about some helpful tips to make your battles go a bit smoother. You may be tempted to rush headlong into a group of enemies and start slashing away. And while this might work in other ARPGs, I found taking a more thoughtful approach was a much better way to tackle combat in V Rising. Even basic enemies in this game can do a lot of damage, so I recommend trying to peel 1 or 2 enemies off of a group so you can whittle down your opponents without getting overwhelmed by the whole mob. It also helps if you eliminate smaller mobs before engaging the bosses that you will need to farm out in the world. For instance, this fight against the Ice Archer boss was a lot more manageable as a 1v1 encounter because I took out a lot of her minions before aggroing her. The core gameplay loop in V Rising involves tracking and killing these bosses called V Blood Carriers. Defeating one of these baddies gives you great rewards, including things like new spells, weapons, and crafting recipes. In the early game, you'll want to get yourself geared up and take out the first 3 targets of your choice as soon as you can. And this is a good time to talk about the different blood types in V Rising. When you drop an enemy to low health, you'll notice an option to feed on them along with a percentage value. Higher value blood types give you various buffs to things like movement speed, sunlight resistance, health regeneration, and many more. Every time you feed on an enemy or consumable until completion, you will change your overall blood type. So ideally, you'll want to feed on high value blood types in order to maximize your buffs. Over time, your blood pool will drain, and you'll eventually need to feed again. Failing to do so will cause you to take significant damage until you've satisfied the hunger, so to speak. But if your blood pool is already full with a high-ranking blood type, then it's not beneficial to switch to a new one. However, you can still feed on enemies without changing your blood type by canceling the feed before the meter is filled up. In this case, the enemy will die, and your blood type will remain unchanged. This is a great move that you can use to finish off enemies, especially if your abilities are on cooldown. Gathering resources is an essential part of the gameplay loop in V Rising. You will use these resources to craft better gear, build out your castle, and feed various modules like your castle heart and mist braziers. Bones are an important resource dropped from skeletons and other enemies. You'll use these to fuel your mist braziers, which help block out the sun over a small area. Paper will be used to craft and unlock new crafting blueprints. Coarse thread is another important resource that you'll want to keep an eye out for. Early on, you'll also want to construct a sawmill, tannery, and ore refinery in your castle. Sawmills are used for converting raw wood into planks. The tannery can convert animal hides into leather. And the ore refinery turns copper ore and other materials into ingots. All of these will be required to craft stronger gear. One nice thing about these workstations is that you can load a bunch of resources into them and then let them passively run while you go complete other tasks. In the early game, you'll first craft bone armor and weapons, but you'll want to craft copper ones as soon as possible to increase your gear score. This will help you greatly as you track down the first V-Blood carrier bosses in the early game. Just a few other tips before you log off the game. I highly recommend resting in a coffin if you can before logging off. Your character model will still be stationary and vulnerable in the world even after you quit out of the game. In fact, one of my first experiences playing this game was logging on and seeing that I had been killed while I wasn't even playing. This was on a PVE server too, so it wasn't even like I got killed by another player. You can avoid this by climbing into your coffin. That way some stray animal or vampire hunter won't gank you when you're sleeping. Another thing you'll want to do is add some blood essence to your castle heart. Leaving your castle heart unfueled for an extended period of time will cause your castle to decay and become vulnerable to attack. And even on PvE servers, other players can destroy your castle if you leave it in complete disrepair for too long. Here's me destroying some poor bloke's castle. Sorry bro, I needed some footage for this video. But while you want to keep your castle heart topped off, you may not want to do the same thing for things like mist braziers. These devices block out the sun and are fueled by bones, but leaving them topped up while you're away just wastes resources in my experience. You can never have enough bones, by the way, so be sure to loot and farm those at every possible opportunity. If you're interested in playing V Rising for yourself, then click on my link in the description and pick up a copy of the game today. The game is available on Steam and will be coming to PlayStation 5 later this year. The Castlevania event is also live right now, so dive into the game and challenge Simon Belmont to an epic boss fight. This is a phenomenal vampire survival game that I had a lot of fun with, and I think you will too. But don't just take my word for it. V Rising has excellent reviews on Steam, with many players enjoying the game during its early access period. So it's nice to see them bringing out the full release build after years of diligent work. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to Big Dan Gaming for more RPG content. Big shout out to all the channel members for supporting my videos. Until next time, this has been Big Dan. I should go.